Welcome to Rightly Dividing the Word. Today I have a special guest today, Dr. Wendell Dandridge from the Worship Center TV. And so today we're going to just have a discussion that's true and dear to his heart and something that often I've thought of, and I think many of you who are of the African American persuasion have thought of too. So Dr. Dandridge, I'd like to welcome you to my channel. Also, can you give us a brief bio, sir?
So with myself, I have a PhD in Christian ministries, backtracking, a Master's of Divinity inside the psychology of religion, and then a bachelor's inside of psychology and religion from Morehouse College. I teach at Clark Atlanta University right now 3 courses, and that of biblical heritage, and that of African American religious experience, and then also contemporary religious thought. So the topic tonight, specifically plantation theology, is what it has been labeled, and also slave theology. One of the things that we have kind of crossed over into inside of modern Christianity is one of the topics that I love discussing. It's one of the topics that I love really, truly delving into, because a lot of what we experience inside of the Black church experience, and I'm using Black church, I'm using Black church experience intentionally instead of African American church experience, because both of those things are very, very different, spur out of plantation theology. They spur out of slave theology. They spur out of harsh Huppers theology. Okay, so I'm truly excited about tonight's discussion.
Explain the difference between the African American and the Black church, because most know it's taboo to say Black now, and it's politically correct to say African American. So why do you make the distinction?
So one of the things that I would love to bring to light is the modernity of ethnicity. And when I speak about the modernity, I talk about some of the modern ethnic things that have been brought into place. One of the primary things that I want to bring to light is 23andMe. And this is no publication to them, but one of the things that they bring about is the fact that most people are not just of one race. We cannot just say that we are Black. We cannot just say that we are Caucasian. We cannot just say that we are Native American. We cannot just say that we are Irish. We cannot just say that we are Scottish. We cannot just say that we are of Asian descent or Mexican descent or Spanish descent. So to utilize the term African American automatically places you in the position of those two bipolars, of being either African or American, without even acknowledging some of the other things that might be a part of your natural DNA. Now, Black, yes, it does have a connotation of segregation, Jim Crow laws, as well as just the hue of your skin. But to be Black as well includes our brothers and sisters of Hispanic descent, Spanish descent, anyone who is brown, essentially, Haitian descent has to be included inside of that. So we have to really look at how we verbalize as well as connotate what we label as African American, as well as Black, as well as colored, as it relates to the brown and people of color religious experience, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. It really makes sense. But hold on. I thought, if you 1/8 Black, especially here in America, you consider Black. No matter
So
what.
the one, so here's the thing with the 1/8, and I hate to get so deep inside of the initial part of this conversation, but even math does not align with our roots as it relates to African descent. And I'm being very, very intentional with my words with regards to African descent, because mathematics says that 1 times 0 equals what?
0.
Okay, that does not make metaphysical sense, because how can energy, which is the 1, times nothingness, which is the 0, completely obliterate the 1?
Man, you getting into some deep stuff here. You don't
It
say
does
the
not,
word.
it does not make mathematical sense, spiritual sense, social sense, or even racial sense. Because if you want to go to that 1/8, if you want to go to the fact that the Black voters' vote was 2/3, like, how can you diminish the percentage of anything when it is already whole within God's essence?
All right, so why do we worship like we do? Why do we do that?
The reason that we worship that we do is really because we had to adapt with what we were given, juxtaposed to what we had. When you look at a lot of the things that we experience, when we look at a lot of the things inside of the African American Black experience church, we see that they are really offsprings of the African experience. And I use the term African experience because you cannot say inside of the African experience that there is spirituality, religiosity, and the totality of self. Inside of the African experience, there is this notion that all things are inclusive of one another. Prime example, when we see people, quote unquote, catching the Spirit, catching the Holy Ghost, getting filled with the Holy Ghost inside of our modern church, we don't realize that when we were brought over as slaves, one of the primary things that was done as far as African cosmology, as far as African religiosity, as far as African day-to-day experience, was the possession of spirits. It was no thing for your grandmama, your aunt, your uncle, your cousin, your brother to come inside of the community, inside of whatever posture was happening at that place. And they would make themselves known by possessing a person. This is one of the reasons why we see people, quote unquote, and I'm just going to go there, convulsing and speaking in tongues and doing all this other kind of crazy stuff. As far as African culture is concerned, that was not the Holy Ghost coming inside of you. That was one of your ancestors coming inside of you and making it known that they were still present with you. Now, we don't always just see this inside of African culture. We also see this inside of Hispanic culture. We see this inside of Spanish culture. We also see this inside of Mexican culture with Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. We see this inside of All Saints Day. So a lot of these cultures really do collaborate with one another. in such a way to where we have to acknowledge our ancestors. We have to acknowledge the dead. We have to acknowledge those who have gone before us, because all of us can attest, regardless of our racial background, regardless of our ethnic background, regardless of our religious background, that watch this, we have all felt the spirit of one of our ancestors at one point in time inside of our lives.
Because this is a Christian broadcasting, you know where I'm at, you know where I'm gonna go. Because especially from the Reformed community, they say that's a no-no. Ancestral worship, ancestral acknowledgement, that's not good. So how do you reconcile that?
How I reconcile it is look at the primary focus of the Christian doctrine, who is Jesus. And if Jesus did not die, which automatically made him an ancestor, why do we give him the amount of credit that we do today? Because even looking at Jesus and worshiping Jesus, acknowledging the fact as Christians that he died and automatically made him an ancestor. How do we negate, and even Jesus acknowledge the prophecies of those that came before him? Even Jesus acknowledged Adam, Abraham, Isaac, Moses, Noah. Even Jesus acknowledged his ancestral lineage in order to validate his present reality.
It's one thing for him to acknowledge the ancestors of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob versus the slide. You see where I'm going?
Can I break the epistemology of even the word reform?
Yes, sir.
In order for you to be a reformist, you have to do again what was already formed, which ultimately has to acknowledge what was originally formed. In order for you to be a reformist, you have to acknowledge the ancestral nature of what was already formed. This is one of the problems with the early church. This is one of the reasons why there is the divide between Christianity and Jewish thought and theology. Because one says that the original form of the Old Testament is still valid. This is Jewish faith. This is Jewish theology. It says that the original form is what we're still looking for. They are still looking for the Messiah. They are still looking for the coming one. Reformed theology, Christian thought says, look, we know what happened inside of the Old Testament, but we have now reformed. Come on, Romans. Be not conformed to this world, but be reformed by the renewing of your mind. We have now reformed what you said inside the Old Testament in order to solidify what Jesus is to the Christian faith. So even this notion of reformality, even this notion of even acknowledging past, even this notion of acknowledging what happened before, or even ancestors before, you do not have what you have today without acknowledging what came before you.
All right, so the question becomes, why do we practice Christianity, or did the white man give us his religion? What's your response to that based on the things you just said?
So, to be honest, And again, I'm just taking little notes so that I have my thoughts placed together. The reason why we practice Christianity is because we had to. The notion of tonight's discussion is centered around plantation theology and slave theology. And one of the things that I really want to push, which is one of the things that I teach inside of my class at Clark Atlanta University, is we did not become Christian. We were not baptized because we wanted to. We became Christian. We were baptized, and watch this, even given biblical names because we had to.
Okay. So I'm gonna give you a little pushback on this. Give you a little pushback. So how do you explain the Ethiopian church then? How do you explain the Coptic Egyptian church or the Alexandrian church? How do you explain those things?
So those things can be explained very simply. And it can be explained in two words: the Roman Empire.
Okay. Okay.
Because when you look at, let's just be honest, the circumference of Jesus's influence was only about the state of Georgia. However, it was not until the Emperor of Rome accepted Christ on his deathbed that it became the religion ultimately of the world, because at that time, they were what? The dominating factors of the world. Now, if you want to go back to Egyptian philosophy, if you want to go back to Egyptian theology, Christianity does not align with it at all. Because even Egyptian philosophy and theology, if you want to call it theology, there were multiple gods inside of Egyptian belief.
So polytheism.
Exactly.
For the most common people, polytheism.
The polytheistic form of nature goes all the way back to the book of Exodus. Because when we look at Moses, when he and we always look at the story of Moses is dropped off inside of this world, and he is raised. He's dropped off inside of the creek. He's sent down the creek and picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter and raised inside of the Pharaoh's home, and then leaves the home because he kills the slave, and then he's met with the burning bush, and then he leads the people through the 7 plagues. Let's not forget, he was raised in the house of Pharaoh. He was raised in the Egyptian house for the majority of his life. And we can actually look back on history and see that 90% of the 10 Commandments is actually Egyptian law.
Oh man, you're going there. So,
because you asked me to.
No. This is what we're gonna do. But here's my pushback. Yes, I think Christianity was given to us not in this purest form, but still, is Christianity true? That's the real question.
So Christianity has no pure form. If you look at New Testament theology and also New Testament references, the term Christian is actually a derogatory term.
Okay.
If you look at all of the references, and you can Google it. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna Google it right now as we're talking. How many times is the word Christian utilized in the Bible? The word Christian in the Bible is actually only found 3 times.
So you got me. I only thought it was once, but that's not so.
3 times.
But hold on.
Because to
But
be
hold
a
on.
Christian inside of that modern day age. Now here's the thing. To be a Christian 2,000 years ago versus to be a Christian in 2024 are completely different.
No, we're
And
not.
we have to acknowledge that.
No,
We
no,
have
no,
to
no.
acknowledge.
That's not. No, 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 no. But see, that's something totally different.
As you're doing that, we have to acknowledge that to be called a Christian in the 40 to 50 years after Jesus died was almost like being called a bitch.